First off, thank you to the AASM Foundation, um, Doctors Varga and Miski, as well as the home office that's been steering the ship here and pulling us all together. I'm really excited to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation. So the topic today is refining your NIH Biosketch. And at first it sounds like a pretty dry topic, but it turns out this is a pretty important thing that comes in all these proposals that through your careers, you're going to continually be putting in for NIH, NSF, VA funding, whatever else. And there's been a lot of changes in the last year or two on the NIH Biosketch. So I'm going to try to highlight those and hopefully, field some questions at the end if things aren't clear. I have a conflict of interest of sorts. I do have a contract with Merck. I look particularly at the hypnotic efficacy of orexin receptor antagonists and rodent models. Don't think that's going to have anything to do with what I talk about today, though. So at the conclusion of this course, being this talk, we're going to understand first off what is the NIH Biosketch. We're going to talk about the new changes, the updates and changes that have recently been announced by NIH and now required. We're going to review some do's and don'ts of reporting information and decide if science CV should be used to develop the Biosketch. And by the way, I presented this to my colleagues last week as a little practice run, and I'd say only 30% of the room knew even what science CV was. Okay, but we'll go over it. Okay, so the NIH Biosketch. So it's required for all new renewal funding for NIH. I'm assuming a lot of people are familiar with it here, but maybe not everyone. We are young investigators here. It's for all sorts of different applications. So the classic R's, everyone knows about, the R01s, R21s, et cetera. Career Development Awards, so that's particularly interesting, I would think, to this group, K99s and such, training and fellowship grants, program project grants, small business grants, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't the complete list. This is just kind of examples of the different types of funding applications at NIH. Other funding agencies also use the form, for example, the VA, where I also work. And then keep in mind, other agencies may have their own version of a Biosketch. So for example, NSF does have a Biosketch, but it does look different than what we're going over today. It's basically the same information they're asking, though. So what's the Biosketch? So first off, who should do one when you put in a proposal? Well, first off, all the senior and key personnel, and as well other significant contributors. By the way, this slide set I think is going to be eventually available to everyone. So there's a few hyperlinks in here. So keep that in mind that, if you want to know about the actual definition of what is a other significant contributor, click that hyperlink. It'll go right to the NIH page, which gives this definition. Which is investigators committed to the project but are not designated any specified measurable effort. The first thing you got to do is get ERA Commons ID to get all started. Okay, and to get your registration going, it usually comes from your institution, say your sponsored programs administrator. So keep that in mind. And the bottom here is the link. This is where if you have any questions about Biosketches, you click this hyperlink, you go to the NIH page, and it'll take you from there. So the NIH Biosketch pretty much allows applicants to describe their scientific contributions, including, relevant publications. But as well, one thing that you have to keep in mind is you shouldn't have one Biosketch and keep putting it in for every single proposal you're putting in. You should be kind of fine sculpting it because you want to be in the context of the proposal, what you're describing, specifically in section A that we'll be going over. In that section A, but throughout the Biosketch, what you're trying to do is a who, what, and why. You want to say who you are, what makes you great, what contributions you have made to the field, and why you are particularly appropriate to play the proposed role that you are going to play in the submission. So let's go over the non-fellowship Biosketch. So this is the top section, the table they call it. This is a new form. I'm going to repeat more than once during this presentation. Keep an eye on the top right corner dates. Okay, because there's old forms and new forms. This one's good till 2024. I think there's a somewhat older form that's still floating around, good till 2023. Either are good right now, but don't use an expired one. In particular, ways you will know if it's an expired one is a few new things. Section B, they've added scientific appointments. It used to be just positions and honors. And for non-fellowship as well, there is no more Section D. Section D used to be where you listed all your grants. Okay, so let's look closely at the top table. First off, this is funny. So this is the example on the NIH website. And already I noticed something that was not congruent necessarily, which is I just showed you 2024 as the news form, but the example on the NIH website is actually 2023. I looked at both forms. I couldn't tell the difference between the two. So I think it's still appropriate that we look over the NIH example. So the very first thing about the Biosketch is you aren't going to exceed 5 pages. You're going to enter your ERA Commons ID that I mentioned may come from SPA, from your institution and such. You're going to list your position. And then you're going to list your education and training. And this usually is undergrad, graduate work, and then as well, postdoctoral and residency type programs and such. So for instance, here we have a postdoc at UC Berkeley that is being listed with a completion date. So here's section A. Now, I'm not going to have you read the whole thing, but this is the new section A. And this first paragraph here, this is the pitch. Pretty much. Why are you well suited to play the role on the project? Okay, you should be highlighting your experiences and qualifications appropriate for the project. This is something that I think is very important. Explain factors that may be affected productivity. So say something has happened in your life. I can use myself as an example. In 2013, car accident, broke my back. I'm around 6 months to a year where I wasn't full-time in the laboratory necessarily. So I, at one point, because there was a little gap in not only funding, but a little gap as well in productivity of getting papers out, I did put one sentence in there briefly mentioning it, but then I got back on the horse and, continued on. Here, example here, it's listed during 2015, 2016, my career was disrupted due to family obligations. You don't need to give a whole, multiple sentences to describe what's happened, just a little mention, because it can be picked up that maybe there's a little gap in your publications or such. So then moving on, and this is something that's new in section A here for the non-fellowship, this is where you highlight grants now. It used to be you would list them in section B, but now you bring them up into section A. Ongoing and recently complete projects I would like to highlight include. So here we have a listing of 3 different grants. Looks like Dr. Hunt was a PI, but as well a co-investigator. So it's pretty much list your grants that are relevant to the project that is being proposed to the NIH. And then you list up to 4 citations. As well, bold your name in the citations. And when possible, it's understandable, especially when you're a more junior, young investigator, you may not be able to fill all 4 citations with first or last authorships, but as you progress, you maybe should be striving to do this. And again, for each submission, modify this personal statement, the relevant funding, and the citations. So if I'm pitching a neuroanatomy proposal, my layout here in section A may be a little different than something that's maybe more oriented to behavior or whatever else. Here's section B. So again, there's a new addition to the title, being scientific appointments. One thing that got me just around 4 months ago is because I had to go into my Biosketch and reverse everything, because it turns out now they want everything in reverse chronological order. It turned out that was new. List your relevant positions and honors, add new positions with expected start dates. And one other thing that was a good question that when I kind of pitched this to my group, they brought up is the idea of, well, what if you're a more senior investigator and this list gets really long? I don't think you want to fill an entire page of your Biosketch with section B. So I think what's important is to determine, everything that's active and present that you're working on and involved in, being the appointments and positions. And then you're going to have to go back through things in the past that you think maybe are relevant that should be included. I think this would be, positions, work you've done at various institutions, but maybe, in 1992, I was a member of the American, Chemical Society for 2 years. Maybe eventually, if this gets so long, I wouldn't need to be mentioning that there. So keep that in mind. Okay, section C, your scientific contributions and achievements. You can have up to 5 subsections here. In each subsection, you should identify your role in the contributions. Are you a PI or are you a co-investigator? You're allowed up to 4 references per section. Although in this example, they aren't given, some investigators, including myself, like to give little subsection headings. So, for C1, I could have, this is actually from my Biosketch. My early work when I first got to Harvard was looking at adenosine and its role in promotion of sleep. So this is an example where I put that as a heading, and then I have my description of this contribution, and then I had my references after that. And then lastly, if you haven't done it yet, you're going to start wanting to set my bibliography. Okay, so this is on your My NCBI page, which you log in with your ERA Common ID. And this here is where you will develop pretty much your listing of your references. So I just showed you the non-fellowship NIH Biosketch. The one difference with the fellowship Biosketch, though, is section D here, okay? So there is no more section D in the non-fellowship, but in the fellowship, it still remains. But it drops your grant funding. That's where you used to list it. Now it's just for scholastic performance. So it makes sense that this in particular would be for fellowships. Here's the example for Dr. Hunt's NIH Biosketch again. Scholastic performance only. Looks like at Georgetown it was pass fail, and has a listing here of the courses and how she did. Okay, so this is straight from the NIH page. We've gone over pretty much these changes, but I want to just reiterate them one more time. Section A, include the details of ongoing complete research projects in the last 3 years that you want to bring attention to. Section B is now including scientific appointments. Now, there's a reason why this has been added to section B, because of individuals in all sorts of different scientific fields maybe not fully disclosing their relationships to, say, for instance, domestic and foreign institutions that they maybe should have. So you got to list all your current positions, both domestic and foreign, all your scientific appointments, domestic and foreign affiliations, foreign entities or governments, titled academic, professional, or institutional appointments, and then certainly your achievements and honors. And then once again, section D, it just now is for fellowships and specifically for grades from graduate school. Okay. I'm going to just briefly mention the other support document because it's kind of tied into the Biosketch. So when you put a new NIH grant in, you don't first submit the other support document. For progress reports, you do submit other support if there's been a change with what was previously submitted the previous year. And then what's usually exciting is when you do get an NIH grant and your PO or grants administrator at NIH reaches out to you asking for your just-in-time paperwork, this is when you'll be submitting your other support pages. Okay, so the changes, what were the new changes? Certainly NIH wants you to disclose pretty much everything. So within 30 days of anything that you think should be disclosed to NIH, regardless of your other support at NIH, you should be probably communicating this to them. All PIs and senior key personnel should be submitting this other support when appropriate, and disclose all research-related endeavors. Okay, so for NIH as well, in February 2022, they are now strongly recommending Science CV, which we'll go over in a minute. They want copies of all foreign agreements or contracts, and they must be submitted as documentation, usually through your sponsored programs office, with your other support, and it has to be translated into English. And you have to electronically sign now the other support form, which I errantly signed, put hand signature recently in, and it got bounced back by my sponsor program saying, go sign in Adobe Acrobat. And you cannot delegate either your signature authority. You have to be the one putting your electronic signature on the other support page. So once your Biosketch is submitted with a proposal, what happens? Well, the system itself is going to check for a few things. It's going to make sure all the senior and key personnel on the application have a Biosketch. It's going to have to be in a PDF format, and you can't be over 5 pages. After submission, though, other aspects of the Biosketch are manually reviewed, probably by a grants administrator or such at NIH. So let's go over a few do's. Make sure you're using the most recent form. And the best way to do that is check the NIH website, or if you're using Science CV, it will probably do that for you. It must be in the PDF format. Favor clarity over detail and jargon, which again, you don't want someone to not be able to decode what you're trying to get across as a message. Font should be 11 point. They have recommended fonts. Again, consider using Science CV. When you list references, list them with your PMC ID numbers when available. I hate to say it, I'm old enough that I have 1 or 2 papers that are even preceding when PMC IDs existed. Disclose as appropriate. Once again, in both other support and section B of the Biosketch, pretty much everything. Don'ts. No figures, no tables, no graphics, no embedded or attached files such as video, graphics, sound, or data. No hyperlinks with the exception of your My Bibliography link, which is going to be at the very end. Now, this is a general rule, but if you dig into the NIH website, it says that there are some FOIAs that may actually make an exception to that. So, but if you're just doing the regular calls for R1s, R21s, K-awards, et cetera, no hyperlinks except My Bibliography. The maximum is 5 pages, including that top table that precedes the first section. I don't know what I mean by education section. Okay, ignore that. Between your Biosketch and other support pages, again, you should be disclosing everything. So what is Science CV? Science Experts Network Curriculum Vitae. Okay, so this is on the the NCBI page, which you're all familiar with because you can get to my NCBI as well as this is connected to PubMed, et cetera, et cetera. What's great about it is if you start working with this, you're always going to be ensured the correct format of your Biosketch because it's going to be the output of the information that you're going to be putting in. It pulls the award info from ERA Commons, and it's going to pull publications from the NCBI My Bibliography. Helps the researchers assemble the professional information needed for participation in federally funded research. It can create and maintain these Biosketches, and so it becomes your repository of Biosketches, I guess you could say, over time. It's going to eliminate the need to repeatedly enter Biosketch information, and it's kind of a researcher claimed the data repository. So it'll have the information on your expertise, employment, education, and professional accomplishments. Now, where is Science CV? So you go to my NCBI page. If you haven't already, start working on this because as well, that's where My Bibliography is and where you're going to set that up. So on the left here, you can see this is where you would access My Bibliography and get to work creating that. And on the bottom right is Science CV, okay? When you go to that link, what happens? It asks you create a new document. It allows you to first off name the document, and I highly suggest over time that you're going to have a lot of these Biosketches, guaranteed you through your career. So it's good to probably put a date in the document name, especially if you need to track back at a later date of what you put into about this particular Biosketch. Different formatting, which is great because here, for instance, it'll do a formatting for say an NSF Biosketch with the same information. Choose your data source. You can start with a blank document, or you can start with an existing document, which is really great. It's kind of like having a template there that you can just fine tune for each proposal as you're submitting. You can share as well, private or public. Here is the Science CV page where you put the information in, which is not entered here yet. But so for instance, I mean, this should all look familiar to you. There's an education training section at first, which is the top table. It's got sections A, the personal statement, B, position, scientific appointments and honors, and C, your contributions to science, okay? So it should look very familiar because it's the same information we just went over with the NIH Biosketch. So the general advice, usually from NIH, I've added my own advice in here too as a summary. Make it personal, Okay, you're trying to, I guess for lack of a better term, sell yourself. So you're trying to tell the reviewers who you are, your career, and your expertise. Particularly, are you suited to play the role that's proposed in the actual submission? Seek advice and example from peers and senior colleagues about what a biosketch looks like. I think that's particularly important for young investigators. Help the reviewers, okay? Once again, you're the most qualified investigator to do this work. Reviewers are instructed, by the way, to consider that your publication track record, for particularly for early career investigators, is not going to look like a senior investigator biosketch. I mean, if you're just graduated, you only from a graduate school, you only have 3 or so papers. They aren't expecting a full 5 pages chock full of information. So you probably won't reach a 5-page limit at first. And particularly for section C, scientific contributions, you may not have the 5 sections. This is okay. This is going to be expected. And again, favor clarity over detail and jargon. And then certainly get working on your My Bibliography so you have that URL to plug in at the bottom of the end of your biosketch. So with that, thanks for listening. I'll open the floor for questions.